Eddie Thomas, November 29th, 1952. I live on the same farm where I was born, November 29th of 1952. Been here all my life. All of our families farmed all their lives, both sides, Mom's family and my daddy's family too. Daddy was born, he was born a mile from Taylorsville on East River Road. My mother was born on Ashes Creek now in what's the bottom of the lake up there is where she was born. And both sides of her family grew up on Ashes Creek. What I'm going to do is, to begin with, these businesses are all in Taylorsville. I know that I've left out a few businesses. These were the businesses I remember from 1952 to 1970. That's the year I graduated from high school. Most were in business many years. Several are still operating today. This is what Taylorsville was when it was truly a farm community. The town was self-supporting. You hardly ever had to go anywhere for anything you needed. You could, if all else failed, you could order from Sears and Roebuck Catalog or Montgomery Catalog, Montgomery Ward, because we did a lot order from those two catalogs. Now we don't even have one full-time doctor, medical doctor. At that time, we had 3 full-time medical doctors, and I will name them later on. Spencer County had a sheriff, 1 deputy. Taylorsville had 1 town policeman. The Kentucky State Highway Garage was located where the courthouse annex is today, which that part was torn down, that courthouse annex built. Spencer County Jail was in operation. Taylorsville Water Works was operating. Taylorsville had its own water supply. Train stopped operating in October of '52, the month before I was born. Now, some of these things that I'm going through are done out of date because I completed this list in August of '16. Taylorsville had 3 new car dealerships, and the first one I have listed here was Greenville Motors. They sold new Chrysler and Plymouth automobiles, and it's located in what's now the Community Center, Chamber of Commerce, whatever you want to call it. The biggest dealership was Veach Motors, which they sold new Chevrolet cars and trucks. Joe and Margaret Veach were the owners. They were one of the oldest Chevrolet dealerships in the state of Kentucky. And that building is now where the sheriff's office is. Later on, when Joe died, they sold the dealership to Carl Nethery and Joe Billy Stewart, and they moved it to another location, or here in Taylorsville. And they didn't operate too many years, and then the Chevrolet dealership was closed. The other dealership was Van Dyke and Wilkinson, Mr. William Richard Van Dyke and Edmund Wilkinson. They sold new Ford cars, trucks, and tractors. At that time, Ford Farm Tractors was all under the same dealership as the cars and the trucks. They sold all kinds of different types of farm equipment, did service work. And that business was located where Skippy's tow-in lot is now. Another thing Mr. Veach owned, Veach Sales and Service, was a new Alice Chalmer tractor dealership, and they sold new Idea farm equipment as well. And it was across the street from where Taylorsville Hardware is today, which at that time that was Bennett's Hardware. And in the early '60s, they had discontinued the Alice Chalmer dealership. Same location, but Bruce and John Ruby Thomas operated a Massey Ferguson dealership in that same building for a few years, 2 or 3 years, not very long. And then they closed up, and then after that it was just a vacant building for some time, and now it is it's a building that's torn down, it's just a lot. What's next door to it today is Spencer County Sporting Goods, which I'll mention that later on, what that was back then. The biggest business in Taylorsville was J.A. Bennett Incorporated, and they had where Taylorsville Hardware is today. That was a hardware dealership. Up in the second store, they had furniture, excellent furniture. They got furniture from Belknap's. They sold McMahon Cherry from Campbellsville, which I think McMahon Cherry is probably out of business now. But anyway, it was excellent furniture. Okay, they had any kind of tools, lumber. They sold Peruna feed. They sold pea gravel and coal by the ton, and they had sand. There was also a propane dealership next door to that building, which now it's on up the street, still the same family. And they sold in the propane dealership, they had TVs, gas and electric stoves, Maytag washers and dryers, gas furnaces, about anything you could imagine. And also there in the hardware part, the old lumber racks are still in the building, but they had any kind of lumber, any size, dimensions or whatever, and they also sold whole house patterns. They went to, well, they had an old, it was a new International truck tandem axle, and they used to go to the mountains because the train had done stop, so they went to the mountains and got coal by the truckload and brought coal in, dumped it in the coal yard, and still sold a lot of coal for many years. Spencer County Implement was the John Deere dealership. They sold new John Deere tractors and equipment. The owner at that time was Woodrow Chapman. And that is now straight across from the sheriff's office. It's what they call the treasures. I think that guy sells used furniture and whatever. That's where that was located. Kind of run through the grocery stores. Barney's Market, Mr. and Ms. Barney Stout were the owners. Now there, it was on Town Hill. This was outside the city limits of Taylorsville, but it just hit up Town Hill there, about 500 feet where that was. And presently vacant now. I don't know if there's anything there. Now Croom's Grocery was Jay and Martha Croom were their owners, and it is now where there's a wrestling thing is just rented at. It's right there beside the Charlie Warren building. Charlie Warren was the pool hall, and it's still got the name up there on Charlie Warren. Well, next door to that was Mr. and Miss Croom's, and they was in business for many years. And then when Harry Goldstein come in here, he bought an interest with Ms. Croom and operated with her for some time. And then as time went by, then she sold out to him completely. And then, of course, now it's Country Mart, but it's moved in several different locations. Mr. and Ms. Croom was very nice people. OK Market was Mr. Merritt Oder and Mr. King. I cannot remember Mr. King's first name, but that's how they come up with OK. Now, the original store was what is part of Porter Bank Corporation, or the People's Bank, where you walk in the main door now. Of course, that's where it has been for many years, but at that time, next door to that was OK Market, and then there was the Froman Drug, and then next door to Froman Drug was M.H. Skaggs and his son William K. That was their very small office there, but that's where they were. And then the next one was Goebel and Parsons Insurance, and then there was Occasion Clothing, and they sold dry goods and cloth by the roll, bat, or whatever you want to call it. Charlie Warren Pool Hall was next, and then, as I mentioned, Ms. Croom. And then on the corner there that's been a lot of different stores there. It was a laundromat at one time, and then now it's a marriage venue or a meeting of some kind, birthday parties, whatever is there now. Another grocery store, Dorsey Whitaker. It was just a very small place. It was an old building, but it was one of those buildings that was up several steps up off the ground. And it was in the front of, at the time, it was the implement part of J.A. Bennett. And they bought it for the simple fact it was just right in front of their store, so they could make the parking lot bigger. Or the Bennett's Implement at that time. Now it's the Child Services or Welfare Department, whatever you want to call it. That's what that was. Okay. Round on Back Street was Goodrich Grocery, which now it's all the Hume owns he owns the building. He was running a little whatnot kind of thing, called it a whatnot store, but Barry Hume owns it, but I don't think he's got anything in it now. And right straight across from her was Mr. Truman Stennett, which that was Barry Hume's granddaddy, and he operated the store there for many years, grocery store, but that is a vacant lot now that People's Bank owns. Beans's Restaurant. Now, there's two different locations for this. The first Beans's Restaurant was where the drive-in window for People's Bank is today. It was of course, building attached to the People's Bank, but they tore that off and got rid of it. That was the first Beans's location. Marvin Stewart was his name, but they always called him Beans. And the second location was there where the county attorney's office is today, which was just right about 100 feet away. He never owned either one of the buildings, but he rented it. I wondered for years how they come up with the name Beans, and how they come up with that was he lived up on Briar Ridge, and he would cook up bean soup, get it ready, and when they used to have court day, first Monday, he'd come to town with a horse and wagon and sell bean soup off the back of that wagon. That's how he come up with the name Beans. And he was a excellent restaurant man. He was in business for many years. Merle Ross had a restaurant, and the building is still there. It was owned by Mr. Cotton, but it's straight across from where Skippy's Tow-In lot is now. And the building is owned by Ricky Hall, passed away a few years ago, but it's owned by his wife and family. It's just vacant. Now, Keyhole's Restaurant, Leo Matherly is the one who had that built, and it's where Linda's Grill is now. And Keyhole did well. He was an excellent restaurant man. Okay, the sweet shop, Mr. and Ms. Alvin Jewell ran it, and it is where Coots's law office is today. And Best Jewelry Shop, Mr. and Ms. Lewis Best were the owners. They sold watches, rings, jewelry, anything related to jewelry. Did repairs on watches, did excellent work. I used to buy a little stuff from them. And they lived in the back of the shop, him and his wife and 3 kids. Now that building is no more. They tore it down, got rid of it. Miller's Dime Store. Now Miller's Dime Store, that is now a vacant lot. But anyway, I like to go in there as a kid. Ethel Weston Miller was a lady's name, real nice person. It was just what they call it at the time, a 5 and dime, and they sold gifts, school supplies, small household stuff. The main thing I remember about it, when you was going to check out, they had baseball cards, and these new packs of baseball cards. Of course, back in the 50s and 60s, they wasn't worth hardly nothing. And I think about when they talk about these high dollar cards, more than likely some of those little packs of cards had some of those, the well-known baseball people. There's probably a fortune laying there and didn't know it. People's Bank, same location now that it's been for many years. Now, of course, straight across the street there at the county judge's office, that originally was the People's Bank, and it's engraved up over the window, People's Bank. Where the People's Bank today is what used to be the Bank of Taylorsville, which it went broke during the Depression. And when they settled their business up, the People's Bank bought it for the simple fact it had more room. And I've still got a few of those old Bank of Taylorsville canceled checks for whatever that's worth. But anyway, the Skaggs' clinic, I mentioned they were right beside the drugstore. Dr. M.H. Skaggs and his son, William K. Skaggs, both excellent doctors. And then Dr. Tom Snyder, he doctored on me a little when I was a kid. He was getting some age on him. He was a good doctor, but he was an old guy. And of course, his son and grandson were both named Tom. But he had an office there in Taylorsville. And then Froman Drug, which when I was a kid, Robert Carruthers he owned the business, but Ms. Myrtle Watson owned the building. And they not only sold pharmacy stuff and prescriptions and all this, but he also had a building out back, and they sold lawnmowers and paint. And they sold, he had one of his cousins was a TV repairman, and they sold TVs and radios in there. And then Dr. Strong, dentist, he was the only dentist in town. He came here in either 58 or 59, and at one time he had an office when he first came here. I think it was over the drugstore. You had to go up the steps, you know, into the upper part up there. And that's where Dr. Tom Snyder's office always was too. You had to go up a whole bunch of steps to get into that. And then when Dr. Strong came here, they only had the one son. He was just a baby. And as time went by, when they got to where they was financially able, they went up there and built his dental office there beside the Marathon Station. And he practiced there for many, many years. And it's closed now. His son is also a dentist, but he don't practice anymore. We've always had two funeral homes. Foreman Funeral Home is now what was Hall and Taylor. It's had different owners through the years, but Hall and Taylor's owned it for many years. Of course, Greenville Funeral Home, which is now Hoagland, it's also been in the same location for many, many years. Mr. Colvin Barber Shop, that was in the Snyder property, which the Snyder property has been torn down. It's where the Commissioner's Law Office is now, that whole section there. That's when I mentioned Snyder property, that's what I'm talking about. Mr. Colvin was a barber there for many years, and anyway, he moved on. He was getting some age on him, and he went on something else, or he lived in Nelson County. Then John Snyder's barbershop, he had two different locations. The first time he was around in a little one-room building in what is now People's Bank parking lot in back of the bank, and that building's been torn down many years ago. He was there in the building that what used to be the John Deere dealership, which Todd's barbershop is there now in the same location where John was. And Louise Luke is a woman, and she had a barbershop in her house. Well, her house was in what's now the parking lot of Child Services. Warren Pool Hall, Charlie Warren was the owner, and it was there between the Kazan's Dry Goods and Ms. Croom's grocery store, which the name is still on the building, and it's a hair salon now, I think. Herman Cotton's Pool Hall, vacant building now. Ricky Hall, that's the man I couldn't think of his first name, Herman Cotton. It was there beside Myrtle Ross's restaurant. It was a pool hall in one part of it, and then restaurant in the other end of it. Lerman's, it was a small chain clothing store. They had a store in Shelbyville, I think one in Springfield, one in Lebanon. It's currently the Red Scooter, which Beverly Ingram, she lives over the store. That's the way the Lerman's people used to be. Whoever the manager was, they lived over the store, and then they operated the store, which Beverly owns the store, and it's a consignment. She's done right well with it. And then the Kazan's, other clothing store, which I've done mentioned that was now what's Porter Bank property. They sold clothing, shoes, sewing materials. Valley Theater is what then was where Martin's Air Conditioning is. It was built, I think, 1950. The Smith family built it, and they also had one built over at Bloomfield at the same time. And it did well during the 50s until television come along, and then it closed. I think it was in 64, I believe. But everybody got them a TV, so theater didn't do any good. Western Auto Store, Bill and Lee and Bryant, now they was different owners, but now they was I think the last ones that actually owned the Western Auto, operating as a Western Auto Store. And it was located in what was the part of the Snyder property, which is torn down, I mentioned that. McDavid Electric Service, Conley and Dorothy McDavid were the owners. Conley was an electrician. In his younger days, he wired some houses. Later on, he did electrical repair. He was also an excellent locksmith. When he was able, before he got older, he was the man that went over to the bank. If they couldn't lost the keys to the lock boxes, he drilled them and took care of that. And they also had wedding gifts. They had lead crystal. That used to be a big thing. Give us lead wedding presents. And anyway, that was also part of the Snyder property and it's torn down. Tom McDavid, which he was a brother to Conley McDavid, and he did shoe repair and sold new shoes. He also had a shop in what was the Snyder property for a few years. Frosty Foods Locker, now Butcher Block, it's what it presently is. Denny Faulkner owned it for many years. Anyway, they used to process, well, they still do, process hogs and cattle. Now they're mostly into, these people from Louisville come out, and sheep and goats is a big thing they process now. But anyway, the Butcher Block, it's still in operation today. The Robert Black family operated it when I was a kid, and they owned and operated it for many, many years. We had two practicing attorneys. Mr. Edgar Sullivan, he practiced law till he walked into his office under his own power on his 100th birthday. Still had an excellent mind at 100 years old. Gladys Williams Black, her office was there where the county judge's office is today. Best I remember, she owned that whole building, I think. And also, I don't think I wrote this down, but the health department, I remember when I was a kid, they had a health nurse. You had to walk, you used to go into the back of the building and steps, and you had to walk up a steps to get to the second story, and that's where the health department was. But anyway, Ms. Williams was killed in 1972. Her and her mother, they had a guy that used to drive them. Ms. Black wasn't all that old. I think she was just maybe in her 50s when she got killed. And her and her mother, this man that got to drive them some, he'd take them to Louisville if they wanted to go to Louisville in their car, and had a wreck down there. Didn't hurt him too bad, but killed both of them. That was in 72 when that happened. And the Coin Laundromat, I think I've done mentioned that. It was on the corner right on past, it joined Miss Crooms' grocery. It's a wedding venue and a birthday party thing, whatever people want to rent it for and have party in there. It's just a nice place. The old Southern States store, Kerr Mason and his family operated that for many years. He's the one that had it built, and it's been vacant. Mark and Alan Stout own it now. They've just got some of their more so storage than anything. But it hasn't operated as a farm supply for many years. Mr. and Ms. Forrest Slusher, they had a small feed store. It's right in back of the Baptist Church property. And I used to do business with Mr. and Ms. Slusher. They had, it was just a small store, but he went to Louisville once a week and picked up feed, and he said hog feed, chicken feed, and whatever. It now, what the guy used to be, Mayor of Taylorsville, Mayor Pay, Donald Pay, I think. He lives there. There's another feed store around on Back Street called Alcorn's Feed Store. The building itself is still there, but they made it into apartments of all things. Here was the main Crescent Roller Mills, which it burnt several years ago, but it was in operation for many years. Carroll D. Henry and his family owned it. They sold hog feed, chicken feed, any kind of feed you can imagine, feed seed, field seed, coal. They had coal by the ton. They just dumped it there in the yard. And you could bring corn in, and they would crush it. They had a grinder there in the feed mill, and they would crush corn if that's what you wanted. And they also had two portable grinder mixers on trucks that they went through several counties. And they would either be 2 or 3 men on that thing, and they'd have to go in the corn cribs and scoop the corn out. And they took their soybean meal and whatever else along and mixed it with the feed, however, whatever the farmers wanted. And this was before I was born. It was before World War II, but they actually milled flour and cornmeal at the Crescent Roller Mill. If you ever see a feed bag, there's still a few of them left around. Well, flour bag, it says Crescent Roller Mills on it. And so that's where it come from. And I'm thinking maybe I saw one in a Cracker Barrel one time. I had one of them a few years ago, but I gave it to a good friend because he was he's a big corn grower, and I gave it to him. He had it, it was an excellent feed sack, and he had it stretched out like it's supposed to be and all that. And another thing that they had there, they had, I think it was 3 chicken houses there on the property here in Taylorsville. And he grew, bought these, of course, baby chicks. And I don't know if they sold them as fryers or they sold them as pullets, you know, to go into, it was not a laying house, but it was either pullets to go in somebody's laying house or whatever. And of course, they would bring trucks in there at night and catch them, because you had to catch them chickens at night. Silly things, you can't do nothing with them during the day. He had a lot of chickens at one time, I know that. But anyway, a little short story about that. This woman was working for him. I remember he had a new 61 Chevrolet automobile, always kept a nice car. And this woman was a housekeeper, and she went down to the chicken house to tell somebody something. And of course, it was just a gravel road dust. She was in a rush to get down there, and of course, it's just a cloud of dust. Well, she got down there and scared them chickens, and they said when it was all over with, they had 50 or 75 just piled up one end and killed them. They all piled up on one another. Okay. Greenwell Brothers, of course, were in the propane business for many, many years, and back a long time ago, they also used to sell milkers. Oh, back in the 40s, they sold milkers for dairies, but they wasn't in that business too long. Okay, they were a lot like Bennett's. They sold TVs, gas and electric stoves, all kinds of appliances. And they also had plumbing and electrical supplies back when you had all that galvanized stuff. They used to have it all. Paul and Henry Greenwell were the owners. Well, as time went by, Paul got killed in an accident. It was down at Bowman Field, I think it was. It wasn't a plane crash, but something happened to the plane after it was on the ground. It happened on a Sunday, I remember that. But anyway, he passed away, and then Henry, he ran it for many more years, and then he passed, and then his children, they took over. And then just in the past couple of years, then they sold out to whoever owned UPG or something, whatever it is, the name of the people. They still got Greenwell on it, but anyway, it's been sold. It's no longer in the Greenwell family. Mr. Miller's store, that is the big brick building down at the red light there in Taylorsville. When I was a kid, there was not a red light in Spencer County. That was the first red light, was right there at that corner. And it used to be if you couldn't find any hard help, the people stand around the red light down there, or stop sign, whatever, and you go down there and get somebody to help you. But that's all thing of the past. Well, that big brick building there on your left is the old Presbyterian Church. And Mr. Miller, I can't remember his first name, but Mr. Miller, I graduated from high school with his granddaughter. They had it was kind of a multi-use store. When you walked in the front door was a grocery store. On the second story was a clothing store. Mr. and Ms. Miller and Johanna, their granddaughter, she's probably, I think she's done one of these, Johanna Hall. But anyway, they lived in the left side, and then on the right side, they had what I call a little shed of a thing, and they used to sell soft serve ice cream in the summertime. And they operated for many years till Mr. and Ms. Miller got older, and they finally, that was the end of that. I think they called the store the UBC, I think it was, the store. Now, Spears Milk Service, what they call the old creamery. That's where Mike Driscoll, he had more than one ice business, but that's the last place he had was here right off on 155 here in Taylorsville. But anyway, at the time, the Spears family owned it and Taylorsville Transfer, which they hauled milk. And the Taylorsville Transfer, they had more than one driver at the time, but they went to Louisville every day, picked up freight, delivered it to all over Spencer County and also part of Jefferson County. The Spears Milk Service, I know when I was in high school, we still just had a small dairy and we were still shipping milk in cans. And you had to bring it milk to town every morning, keep it in the cooler at night, and then bring it to town in the morning. And had a track carrier, and you have to lift them 10-gallon cans of milk up on that track, and it would take it inside. And they had told Joe Matherly's the one that worked in there, and he had a mallet, and he'd knock the top off them cans, and then he had a big stainless steel vat, and they would dump. Of course, he would dump the milk into that. He'd dump so many cans in there, and then it would weigh. It had scales on it. It would tell every how much your weight was, and he'd write it down. And then they had a big washer thing in there, would wash them cans out. Then later on in the day, you go back and pick your cans up. When I graduated from high school in 1970, Spencer County had something over 200 dairies, and to my knowledge, there is none here today. And I don't think Shelby County used to be the biggest dairy county in the state. And I don't think they've got any dairies. Somebody told me the other day they might have one. But anyway, that's all in the past. And the Taylorsville Transfer was located right on past the Vichy Chevrolet. The building is still there. That's where they operated their freight office out of, and then that's where they had loaded the trucks, take the milk away, even though that was in a separate location. Some of that was just kind of a transfer place where they transferred the milk into the trucks. Albert Ray Bennett, he was a cousin to Robert Carruthers. I mentioned about him selling TVs there at the drugstore. On Saturday night, they would have a TV on in there, and most of the stores stayed open till 9 o'clock, and you go in there and watch TV if you didn't have one. And Bennett's also up there at the propane store. They would have the TV, and you couldn't hear the sound, but they had a timer on it, and they would leave you saw these pictures where the kids would be. I was one of the kids. They'd stand out front and watch TV. That was back in the 50s. Homer Wigington, he had a welding and radiator repair shop, and it was directly in back. The building is still there. It was directly in back of where, after the Skaggs has moved out of the building where they was renting, they built their clinic up there beside the Baptist church. And the building is still there today. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's another doctor's office there now. Well, anyway, Homer Wigington's welding shop was right straight in back of that. Homer did the welding and radiator repair and other little small repairs. He was there for many years. Okay, Slaughter's radio shop, they sold TVs, radios. Mr. Slaughter also repaired them. It was in the Snyder property, which is torn down now. Margie Turner's Dollar Store, now this is a privately owned store. It was not part of the dollar store we know of today. It just happened to be that's what she named it, the Dollar Store. She had gift items, a little bit of everything, and it was in the Snyder, or Snyder's owned that property, which it's torn down. Now, after Joe Veach Chevrolet dealership moved out of where the sheriff's office is today, a few years after that, a man named Dale Cox, he came in here in the late 60s, and he had a sporting goods store there, called it Fun and Son Unlimited. It didn't amount to much. It didn't last a couple of years, and it played out. Hardesty's used furniture was around on Back Street, and it was just a small store, but Bill Hardesty sold used furniture there for several years. Stewart's Auto Body Shop, that was Joe Billy Stewart, and when him and his brother-in-law, Carl Nethery, bought the Chevrolet dealership, they were in business together for a year or so, and then Joe Billy went in the auto body shop himself, and the building now is it was Monroe's shop for many years, and they sold it to a man named Daniel Packer, and he started there probably 6 months ago. Real nice guy. I think I'd do business with him. Okay, now the PCA, which was Production Credit Association, that loaned money to farmers. It was where the school owns. They own it now. The school owns what used to be the old post office there in Taylorsville. And then next door to that used to be the office for some of the school people, whoever was in there. Just a little one-story thing. That was the PCA office. W.S. Day was the manager of that, and then he was there for several years, and then they merged a couple of offices, one in Mount Washington and one in Taylorsville, and went over to Shelbyville and just had one office. Did away with that one. Johnson and Bob Miller Insurance and Real Estate, that building is still there, and now it's a lawyer's office. Bill Stewart and another guy that practices with him, whoever his name is. And they're there right on across from the welfare office. Of course, Farm Bureau Insurance, which Farm Bureau is still very much here. But at that time, it was in the old railroad depot, and they had to get rid of the railroad depot because it was right straight across from Greenwell's Propane, and it's in the middle of where this new 155 is today. And so the building was in excellent condition, but it had to go. It couldn't stay there. Farm Bureau was in part of it. It had a basement to it, and that's where the kids did their 4-H. It used to be called an ASC. It was Agriculture Stabilization, whatever. It was what's now Farm Services. It was also in that building. It had a lot of stuff in there. Okay, then there's Spencer County Insurance, which David Hoagland passed away this past year, I think. He owns Spencer County Insurance. Parsons and Goble Insurance and Real Estate, they sold property and whatever. That was Glenn Goble and Mr. P.T. Parsons. Of course, Glenn Goble's still living. As I've mentioned before, it was there, and now what is Porter Bank property. Mr. Parsons, so I was told, he came here during the Depression. He worked for the federal government, and he was the man they sent in here to, when the Bank of Taylorsville went broke, the federal government sent him in here to settle the assets and the debts of Bank of Taylorsville. And so, of course, he was married, had a family, and for whatever reason, he decided to stay here and spent the rest of his life here, him and his wife. And he's at the Valley Cemetery now. Nicholson Smith Real Estate, which that was Pauline Nichols and J.C. Smith. They sold real estate, and they had an office there. It was a small office there beside Ethel Weston Miller's dime store. That's where they were located. And then there was a Tape Watson's Auto Supply, or not, Tape Watson's Army Surplus. His real name, they always called him Tape, but his real name was Orville. It's a different property owner, but it's right there, it butts up against the red scooter. It's just a little one-story thing. And it's now part of the Spencer County Sporting Goods. But where the Spencer County Sporting Goods is today is what the Texaco station was when I was a kid. Tape Watson, before the Bryants, Bill and Lee and Bryant, he run the Western Auto Store for many years. But he'd got older and got out of that, and then just started this Army Surplus thing when he was older. Willard Stone, of all things, they called him He Diddle. And he repaired antique clocks. He didn't ever advertise, but people all over the country knew him. They'd bring him cuckoo clocks and all that stuff in there. He could fix them. He was an old bachelor. He was a good guy. Okay. Cecil Kinder Auto Repair. That is this building that we're sitting in here right now, the library. It was right on that corner of this library property. It was just a little small building at the time, and he had auto repair thing there. Of course, that was smashed years ago and gone and all that, but that's where Cecil Kinder's Auto Repair was. Ralph McDavid, there again, he was a brother to Conley McDavid and Tom McDavid, and he worked for himself. He was an electrician and a plumber. Taylorsville Dry Cleaners, Wade McAfee was the owner, and it was adjacent building to Greenwell's propane. And he used to go around and had a little truck, and he would go around and you put a little sign in your window, tea, they could see the tea in the window, and he'd stop and get whatever you needed to clean or whatever. Urban Houston, he was a black guy, real nice guy. Him and his sister Emmeline, she was a school teacher, and he had a brother named Sam Houston. Now Sammy worked for Bennett's Hardware from the time I could remember anything till he retired. And they lived just right down the street from the library here. They had a nice house. After they had passed away, City Hall bought that house and they smashed it and made their parking lot bigger or whatever. That's where they lived. But anyway, Mr. Urban, he never drove, never had an automobile or anything. I don't think any of the three of them ever had an automobile. He went around all over town and picked up laundry. A lot of the business people would get him to do their laundry because back in the 50s and 60s, they wore these white shirts and they wanted them starched, and he was really good at what he did. He used to carry a laundry basket on his hip and have his arm around it. And then when he got older, he had a little red wagon he pulled around with his laundry. And he also played piano for the Black Methodist Church. It's a small church beside the Second Baptist. And he was their piano player. It was all very good people. Sergeants, this guy was, they always called him Sarge. I think he was a sergeant in the First World War. I think that's how they come up with that. He moved in here. I think they said back there about the Second World War, the reason he came here, he worked at the rendering plant down on West River Road. Now, the rendering plant was very important because they went around and picked up the dead animals and they needed that grease to make gunpowder. He worked there for several years, and of course that was all before I was born. But he worked at Spencer Magnet. He was their photographer, and he did excellent photography. He did a lot of photos back years ago of people when they had children, little kids and family photos. Did excellent work. Robert Wallace was a refrigeration repairman, and he did good work. Fran's Beauty Shop, Francis Snyder was the owner of that, and his beauty shop here in town. And Stennett Chiropractor, he was here in town for a while. Of course, that's been many years ago. Mr. George Cox, he owned a house and lived in there where now it is the Methodist Church parking lot. He sold fishing bait, minnows, fishing license. And anyway, after he passed, the old house, they sold it and the Methodist Church bought it. Spencer Magnet newspaper, it was owned and operated for many, many years by Claude and Dolly Brock. Later on, they moved to 2 or 3 other locations here in Taylorsville. It's not even printed here anymore. They got printed somewhere else, and that's another story. We had 7 full-service filling stations. Shell Station, Tom Bishop was the owner, which is now where the Teacup Restaurant is. The Sinclair Station, Earl Greenwell owned it, and it's there at the red light. It was a used car lot at one time, but now it's they started up a business there. If you got a broken foundation, they'll come in there and fix the foundation or something. That's what's there now. Okay, the Ashland, there was 2 different Ashland stations. The one Ashland station was right straight across the street. It was also there at the red light. It's a real small building. It's a real estate office now. Earl and Earl McKinley Jr., they was there for many, many years, and they had also had a bulk gas and oil delivery service. They went out in the several counties, 2 or 3 counties, and Mr. Earl, the older guy, he always stayed there at the station, and Junior made the deliveries. That's where the storage units are there now. And then the other Ashland station, it's right beside Linda Huckleberry's restaurant. Ricky Hall operated the repair shop there for years, but he passed away. And then the Texaco station, Virgil Raymond Smith was there at it for several years. I think the original owner was Charles Terrell Foreman, and he was also an undertaker. Today, it's Spencer County Sporting Goods, and that is Lee Ellen Thomas, no relation to me. The Standard filling station, Booker Edmond operated it for years, and it's what the Quick Stop Mini Mart is today. And then the Gulf station, for years it was owned by Charles Smith. He sold it a few years ago. They're trying to get it back in operation. They've got the marathon sign up there, and it's finally going to be back in operation. This is a few things about out in the county. Thompson Duval lived on Highway 55, Bloomfield Road, about 2.5 miles from Taylorsville. Thompson milked a small dairy. Ed Tennant always did that, but he also, I mentioned the Crescent Roller Mills had these portable hammer mill trucks. He also had 2 portable hammer mill trucks, and they went through the country grinding feed for farmers. I don't know the exact year this thing closed. It's either late 20s or around 32, somewhere along there. Taylorsville Loose Leaf Tobacco Warehouse. It was there beside the railroad track. Everybody knows where Pioneer Cemetery is. Well, it was right below Pioneer Cemetery along the railroad track. And then next to it was Bennett's Coal Yard, which it was close to. I don't know if it joined the tobacco warehouse, but it was close to that, which now is Bennett's Apartments. There was 3 rock quarries operating in Spencer County in the 1930s. One of them, Chester Cotton, he was the real estate man, but he owned that farm there. I don't know exactly how many acres, but he owned it for many, many years. And that was probably the biggest ones of the bunch of the 3 quarries. I think Nally over at Bardstown is the one that actually operated it, did the blasting and everything. That was one quarry, and then there was another quarry over on Highway 652, Little Union Road. And the McKinley family, Ms. McKinley has passed away, but her family still owns the property. But it was just a small quarry, and the Snyder family owned it back in the 30s. And in the early 1980s, there was some people come in there and they started the quarry again, but it didn't last but about 3 or 4 years. The rocks was too soft, and that didn't work out. The other quarry was up on off of it was a Highway 44. Actually, the golf course owns the piece of property that I'm talking about. Dan Chica's the one owned it, and my granddaddy Thomas worked for him, and he worked 10 hours a day for 20 cents an hour. Worked for $2 a day busting rock with a 16-pound sledgehammer. Men or women or boys or girls, either one, they can make out of their life whatever they want it to be if they will work and try to do right, not be involved in a lot of this drugs, alcohol, and all this. They will do well regardless of where they live. And it's up to them. They can do whatever they want to do. And that's all I have. That's the end.